Welcome to the Pacific World Research Network, organized by our multi-center Pacific World Research Initiative at UCLA. The Pacific World Initiative is led by the Asia Pacific Center, directed by Professor Min Zhou, the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, directed by Professor Steven Acabado, and the Latin American Institute, which I have the pleasure and honor to direct. My name is Ruben Hernandez Leon, and I'm a professor of sociology here at UCLA. The Pacific World Initiative includes scholars in the US and around the world interested in doing research on Asians in Latin America and Latin Americans in Asia and on trans-Pacific connections and interactions. Today, we are holding our first public webinar on Chinese overseas foreign direct investments in Latin America and the Caribbean until 2021, Conditions and Reflections, by Professor Enrique Dussel Peters. He is affiliated and a professor at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and part of the Center for China-Mexico Studies. Professor Dussel Peters has a Ph.D. in economics from the University of Notre Dame. He is a professor at the Graduate School of Economics at UNAM since 1993. And he is, in fact, the coordinator of the Center for Chinese Mexican Studies, Cechimex, of the School of Economics at UNAM, and of the Academic Network of Latin America and the Caribbean on China, Red ALC China, or Red ALC China. He's a member of the Sistema Nacional de Investigadores, Level 3, a member of the National Research System of Mexico, Level 3, and he is the author of chapters and books on political economy, industrial organization, development, processes of segments of global value chains, and the socioeconomic Latin America and Caribbean China relationship. And he has published these materials, these scholarly publications in Spanish, German, English, Chinese, and Portuguese. Without further ado, I turn the floor to Professor Dussel Peters. Professor, it's a pleasure to have you here, and you can unmute now, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being our inaugural speaker of the Pacific World Initiative here at UCLA.
No, thank you very much, Professor Ruben Hernandez Leon, and also I'm thankful to Professor Min Zhou and happy to inaugurate this Pacific World Network with such a timely discussion and debate. No, I will start sharing my screen as we did a moment ago, and then I guess you can see it correctly, right? Look, what we agreed is I would speak around 30 minutes, maximum 40 minutes, to have some time for some discussions and debates if it comes up. On the topic of OFDI is means the outward foreign direct investment of China, and particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, LAC, Latin America and the Caribbean. And as you will see, we have been working on this topic for more than a decade from a group of perspectives. So I would like to highlight a group of discussions, debates, and issues that might be of relevance for some of you. I will send to Ruben my PowerPoint. I already did. And if there are some of you interested in seeing some of the slides, I would be happy if you distribute them. No? So the topics I would like to share with you.
Enrique, could you put it in the slide mode?
I can, yes, if you want to see it bigger. Is that better?
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So as you will see, we will find a group of discussions, if you want to, with explicit discussions with the so-called think tanks in Washington, D.C. I many times say they are neither think nor tanks, but well, still we call them think tanks, no? And I have been many times in D.C., and it is really surprising how the issue of Latin America and China has become increasingly fashionable, and so you have VIPs that engage in the topics of Latin America and China, but unfortunately, in most of the cases, they do in many cases, do neither read Chinese nor Spanish. They do not integrate to the already existing discussions, as we'll see in a moment. And in most of the cases, as unfortunately, the efforts and results, and to be very diplomatic, are very insufficient. No? So I will start with a group of concepts that, in my perspective, are relevant to understand in general the Latin America-China relationship, and specifically, as we will see, the relationship regarding outward foreign direct investment, and some debates and recent results regarding China's OFDI in Latin America, to finish with some conclusions. No? Again, some references that you might see later. Some concepts that I would invite to consider, and of course they go far beyond simply Latin America. In 20 plus years that we've been working on China from a group of perspectives, as Ruben was highlighting a moment ago, in my opinion, and we have been discussing and presenting this in China and in other parts of the world, the concept of the omnipresence of the public sector in China is fundamental to understand China in 2021 regarding China's overseas foreign direct investment, but also, of course, from a historic perspective, at least beginning in 1949. The public sector in China is an institution that, from what I know, does not exist in Latin America and other parts of the world. No? The public sector in China is the sum of the central government. Of course, the central government plays an important role, but so do provinces, cities, and municipalities. So the public sector are these four institutions, and outstanding in this relationship is that these institutions compete with each other under the umbrella, if you want to, under the political umbrella of the Communist Party of China. From the socioeconomic analysis we have been doing in some of the institutions, such as the Center for Chinese-Mexican Studies, but also the Academic Network for Latin America and the Caribbean and China, when we study tourism, electronics, trade, but also cooperation in academics, R&D, etc., the public sector in China is a fundamental actor in China, in its relationship with the United States, and of course with Latin America. And here I wish to distinguish this issue and this concept of the public sector in contrast to state-owned enterprises, state capitalism, debates on Maonomics, among others. Just to have a quantitative idea, today, in the last 2 or 3 years, based on the National Bureau of Statistics of China, the public sector in China has a share over total GDP in terms of property of around 40%. So 40% of China's GDP is the property of the public sector, and this, just to put it in perspective, comparative perspective to other countries, in the top 10 countries of the world, the public sector in the rest of the countries accounts for less than 5% of GDP. And again, this is only in terms of direct property. Huawei is probably one of the most private firms in China, and as you well know, is not allowed to invest in the United States because of its strong ties to the public sector, the army and other branches of the public sector. If there would be interest and need, I would be happy to go more into depth into this definition and discussion. First concept, the invitation to consider the public sector in China based on its competition and under the coordination of the Communist Party of China. Second concept that I would like to invite you to consider in the Latin America-China relationship, but again, beyond the strict relationship. Since 2013, and with the proposal of President Xi Jinping of the One Belt and One Road initiative in 2013, it was later modified as the Belt and Road Initiative. What we've increasingly been finding in the Latin America-China relationship is that we have to distinguish and structure the analysis in this Latin America-China relationship. Here I always say, a little bit jokingly, a little bit provocatively, against what are known as the green juices. No? In Latin America, at least in Mexico, green juices are very fashionable, they are very healthy, and you put orange juice. In Mexico, you put some nopales and other vegetables, and again, they are very healthy. At the end, you don't exactly know what you are drinking. In most of the recent Latin America and China analysis, you will find lots of green juices. This is in 5-page analysis or 500-page analysis. They start with the now 500 years ago and finish with 5G and discussions on Huawei in Latin America and the United States, etc. And in many cases, they concluded cooperation between Latin America and China have to improve. This we know for decades. Today, in the Latin America-China relationship, what we need is that researchers integrate to specific details, specific topics, specific discussions, such as, on the one hand, trade, for example. China has become the second major trading partner of Latin America in the last 5 years, displacing the European Union. There is still a big gap with the major trading partner of Latin America, which is the United States. But surprisingly, there is a lot of work still to be done in fields such as regional trade relationships within Brazil, within Mexico, within Guatemala, and its relationship with China, and particularly regarding specific global value chains, from soya beans to copper to meat to electronics to auto parts and automobiles. Surprisingly, there are a lot of black holes of issues that are unknown only in the field of trade. A second topic that is substantial is the financing topic in the Latin America-China relationship. China has become in several years a very substantial financing source for Latin America, in several years even more important than adding the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank together. No? And this discussion on financing has other actors, banking and financial institutions, and other debates and characteristics different than trade. A third topic is OFDI, as I will continue in a moment. This is China's foreign direct investment in Latin America. And the fourth topic are Chinese infrastructure projects in Latin America since 2013. We have a monitor on China's infrastructure projects in Latin America for several years now, with statistics, references, etc., that discusses these topics. Again, in terms of integrating to specific topics discussions that are already being discussed and analyzed, with results, with conditions, with conclusions also, in terms, for example, of the impact of China on Latin America's development in the short, medium, and long term, against green juices, overall generalizations, and at the end, irrelevant conclusions. If you integrate to the discussions that are going on in the private, in the public, in the academic sectors in Latin America, from Argentina to Mexico, you will be surprised by the richness of the analysis and proposals, no? Contrary, again, to very autistic and very primitive analysis being done by some VIPs in the, again, so-called think tanks in DC and in other think tanks in the world. And the third and final concept that I wish to share with you is the relevance of China since 2013, and with the Belt and Road Initiative, to consider the possibility of China proposing a globalization process with Chinese characteristics. This is fundamental because China is, this is an ongoing process, no? But China today is proposing a group of economic institutions, such as the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank, and some others that I list in the slide. But you also have a group of concepts, the global community of shared future, cultural components, such as Confucius Institutes, the participation of China in a group of global institutions such as the G20, BRICS, among others. And from a long-term perspective, this is in 2021, China is suggesting an alternative globalization process to the one imposed by the United States, Japan, the European Union, by the so-called Bretton Woods institutions since 1944, after or just at the end of the Second World War. Consider this. And finally, we've been trying to develop the concept which might be of particular interest from an international relations perspective. We've been developing the concept of new triangular relationships, which refers to the issue or to the historical topic that at least since 2017, 2018, when the Trump administration recognized this new the great power competition between the United States and China, that third countries, this might be Japan, Vietnam, Mexico, or Belize, no? Third countries will have to deal in the short, medium, and long run with these increasing conflicts and tensions between the two most important and biggest economies of the world, which is China and the United States. From this perspective, in some cases, the United States, particularly under the Trump administration, have been requesting or demanding in some cases an exclusive relationship with the United States, which means either with me and thus not with China. And this concept, in my opinion, is also interesting and functional, again, for a group of particular analysis, as we will see in a moment, for trade and FDI, among others. It has multiple implications, among others, that most of the countries, at least in Latin America and in Asia, cannot have an exclusive relationship either with China or with the United States, but rather with both. No? in the case of Latin America as a region, imagine that the United States is the major trading partner of the region, but China is the second. So it is impossible to say, am I going to marry China or will I marry the United States? We will have to deal with both in the short, medium, and long term. Thus, the invitation of this new triangular relationship concept. And now, the issue that I was invited to talk of, and I still have enough time, the issue of China's OFDI in Latin America. I would very strongly invite you again to see some of the publications of the academic network of China in Latin America, in Spanish, in English. We have a monitor of China's OFDI in Latin America that we publish annually, and a huge data set that all of you are invited to use. No, this annual monitor is published in Chinese, Spanish, and English, and I very much invite you to go through the details. No. Some discussions and debates regarding China's OFDI, which is the topic where I want to focus. No? So again, you have a big data set. Our network has been doing statistics since the statistics, again, of the think tanks in DC, but of other institutions are clearly not sufficient. And based on the last monitor of China's OFDI, we have, and you can download this by Excel, our database has until 2020 480 confirmed OFDI transactions, with a lot of columns and variables that might be of the interest of researchers and students. No? So each transaction has information about the amount of foreign direct investment, unemployment, the year that the OFDI was realized, the country where it is invested, always Chinese OFDI in Latin America, the sector, the property of the Chinese firm, and we will see in a moment the issue of the public sector in terms of OFDI. And very recently, we even included, we will see it in a moment, we included a variable regarding the geographical headquarters of the Chinese firm in China, with very interesting results. Again, we invite you to make use of this data set. Some discussions then, no? First topic, and I will focus on 5 topics that I believe are relevant and that are being discussed. In most of the cases, very surprisingly, researchers, specialists, usually Chinese researchers use the data of the Chinese MOFCOM, the Ministry of Commerce. In most of the cases in the United States, many use the data set of the CGIT, which stands for China Global Investment Tracker, no? Published by one of these so-called think tanks in DC. And very surprisingly, most of the researchers are not very clear of the methodologies for registering foreign direct for China's OFDI in the world and in Latin America. And statistics matter. The method of registering statistics is crucial. I'm just giving you one example, the year, for example, 2016. No? So imagine MOFCOM, again, which is the Chinese, the public or the official source for China's OFDI. If you use the MOFCOM data for 2016, no? So MOFCOM confirms that China has invested in Latin America around 27 billion US dollars. If you use the same data set, the same data source, MOFCOM, but you exclude the Cayman Islands and the Virgin Islands, MOFCOM refers that China's OFDI in Latin America is not $27 billion, but more something like 1.5 billion US dollars. This is fundamental. So are we going to speak of China's OFDI in Latin America according to MOF, the same data source? Are we going to define it as 27 or $1.5 billion? Clearly, it's not the same, no? So you have to understand that from a methodological perspective, China's MOFCOM its registration of China's OFDI depends on the first country that receives China's OFDI. So financial centers such as Hong Kong, Cayman Islands, Virgin Islands, Luxembourg, etc., in some cases account for 85% of China's OFDI worldwide. If you do not understand this, then you are using a data set and you are not clear of the implications of this. CGIT, again, this China Global Investment Tracker, accounts for around 17 billion US dollars, and our monitor, the work we do, case by case, 480 transactions that you can download, accounts for 7.5 billion US dollars. The differences are huge and statistics matter. You cannot simply use data sources, data sets without understanding its methodology and implications. I am not saying that, that the data sources are lying. What I'm saying is that in some cases the quality of the data sets is very poor. No, in some cases the CGIT still accounts for announcements of China's OFDI, and in many cases they still include transactions that were never realized. No, so again, it is important to understand that statistics matter. No. Second topic that I would like to no, look, here we go. Yeah. Another topic that I would like to share with you. No, again, if you go in detail through this monitor of China's foreign direct investment in Latin America, the last version published in 2021, probably the most relevant trend in the last 5 years of China's OFDI in Latin America is the issue of diversification. And there is a huge and very substantial debate behind this, because in most of the analysis regarding China's OFDI in Latin America, most of the researchers and analysts still have the anecdotal information and result that in reality China is only after raw materials in Latin America. And this was true, but until 10 years ago, for the first decade of the 21st century. In the last 5 to 10 years, China's OFDI in Latin America has diversified dramatically. Just to give you some examples, no? So China, Brazil and Argentina were in the first decade the most important recipients of China's OFDI. And here you can see, again, I don't want to bore you with all this information and data, but in the period or until the period 2010-2014, Brazil accounted for more than 40% of China's OFDI. One country, more than 40% of China's OFDI in Latin America, and this has fallen dramatically in the more recent period until 2019 and 2020. Look at the case of Argentina. Again, if you sum up the China's OFDI, and if you sum Argentina plus Brazil until 2014, they played a substantial role. In the more recent period, 2019, 2020, this diversification is by country. No? Why by country? Because Argentina and Brazil have had important socioeconomic problems in the last 5 years, but also Chinese firms have been learning and diversifying their portfolio. So suddenly countries such as Chile, Mexico, Colombia, and Peru play a more important role. Again, we have to update our knowledge regarding China's OFDI and not keep on with the old story of China searching only for raw materials in South America. This is clearly not the case in terms of countries. And this is not the case, this is the process of diversification beyond raw materials. This is clearly not the case also in terms of the sectors of destination of China's OFDI in Latin America. Again, in the period 2005-2009, China's OFDI in raw materials accounted for 95% of China's OFDI in the region. So yes, the story was correct. For that period, the China's OFDI invested in raw materials. But the share of raw materials has fallen dramatically from 95% to a little bit above 50%. What has been going on in this diversification process? Well, suddenly you have new sectors of interest for China's OFDI, particularly the respective domestic markets. No? So the domestic markets that played a minor role historically in the more recent period, 2015-2020, accounted for 36%, and manufacturing is also increasing its share in China's OFDI. Again, simply to stress the sectorial diversification process of China's OFDI more recently. Two more topics regarding China's OFDI. The relevance of the public sector as defined earlier, this is as the sum of the central government, provinces, municipalities, and cities, no? The omnipresence of China's public sector in terms of OFDI and specifically for Latin America and the Caribbean. Historically, in 2000, 2004, 2005, 2009, the public sector accounted in some cases almost for 90% of the total amount of China's OFDI in Latin America. No? So the omnipresence is very clear. This is a substantial difference to the incoming foreign direct investment for most of Latin American countries, coming from the rest of the world. This is from Japan, from the European Union, from the US. The public sector plays an absolute irrelevant role, not in the case of China. In the more recent period, there has been a decline in the share of the public sector in terms of the amount of OFDI. It has been falling still to very high levels of around 70%, no? And in terms of employment, the employment share has been falling importantly, no? This leads to one of the additional discussions and results that China's OFDI in the public sector is much more capital intensive than China's private OFDI. No? And this is an interesting topic for later debates interested in attracting foreign direct investment. So in many cases, private foreign direct investment might be interesting because, again, they generate more employment than these huge public of the transactions in huge transactions. No? 2 or 3 more slides and I finish. Again, I invite researchers, students, Ph.D. students, but also BA students to go through some of the information and data. These 480 transactions, each one are defined also by the geographical situation or origin of the headquarters of the Chinese firm. And here again, an interesting result is that until very recently, Beijing played a crucial role as the main place of origin of the headquarters of the Chinese firm, and there has been a slow diversification process beyond Beijing. No? So we have an association between public OFDI and Beijing and slow diversification process. No? Some of the conclusions, and with this I will finish. No, I believe it is very important and substantial for new researchers, young researchers, but also older researchers, to integrate to the existing research in Latin America, in China, and in other parts of the world, to integrate to the discussions and debates in general, but very specifically regarding China's OFDI in Latin America. You have the Institute of Latin American Studies of CAS in Beijing that has analysis for more than 2 decades. No. More recently, in the last 15 years, our research network has been working at the micro level, at the meso level, at the macroeconomic level, and the territorial level regarding China's OFDI and its impact. Also, more recently, regarding the quantity and the quality of the employment generated by China's OFDI, etc., etc. Again, you do not have, in many cases, to rediscover the wheel, but you have to understand debates that are going on in different parts of the world. No? I believe, in order not to fall into only a descriptive analysis on China-Latin America relations, and particularly regarding China's OFDI in Latin America, it is very important to have a group of concepts to understand some of these relations. Otherwise, you fall in what some people call a little bit sarcastically in yo-yo economics. No, the yo-yo goes up and down and up, and then in June the growth rate falls by 5%, and July it increases by 7%, and in August I don't know what, and you have a presentation of 45 minutes of charts and graphs and regressions, and after 45 minutes you understand less than 45 minutes ago. No? So I invite you to use some of these concepts, no, such as the public sector, not the state, not state-owned enterprises, not state-owned enterprises. Worst case scenario, I have some articles and documents on this. Worst case scenario, China's public sector in SASAC defines the state-owned enterprises as 119 firms. Imagine the difference between state-owned enterprises, 119 firms, vis-a-vis the public sector owning 40% of China's GDP. It's not the same, quantitatively and qualitatively. I believe that this concept of new triangular relationships is also an invitation to go beyond this fashionable debate and discussion that has come up in the last probably 2 years of the new, or in some cases not even new, but simply of the Cold War. And so we have lots of millennial students and they say, Cold War, I don't know exactly what you're speaking of, and they look at Google and then in Wikipedia they find Cold War, Soviet Union and the United States, and the Soviet Union does not even exist. And so the Soviet Union is the same in China. This is not very useful. I think China is a completely different country than the Soviet Union and is posing massive challenges to the United States in terms of trade, financing of the infrastructure projects and many other issues globally and in Latin America. What we need is again to go beyond these green juices, and we have to allow and we have to integrate and we have to deepen analysis regarding specific topics. What are you discussing? Are you discussing infrastructure projects or are you discussing OFDI? Big surprise, you will find a Brookings Institution papers by David Toller, where you, at the end of the document, you never understand what is he working on, what is his analysis on? Is it on OFDI or is it on infrastructure projects? And they switch concepts constantly and end up with statistics and proposals that are not very interesting or not very relevant. And I finalize highlighting again the importance of this effort of creating this Pacific World network. As you might imagine, I would be happy and could participate only on the issue of China. Asia and the Pacific is huge, and I always say the more we work on China, the less we understand. So it's a huge challenge to try to understand the Pacific world. But in my experience, it is fundamental to strengthen public, private, and academic institutions that work in the long term. This is what is not working out in most of Latin America, and it is very surprising that in most of Latin American countries, even for the big countries, such as Brazil, you have very weak private, public, and academic institutions. And in most of Latin America, you simply don't have institutions. It's not that they are weak or they are strong. There is simply not one academic institution working on China. And so if you don't have these institutions, it is very difficult to depend simply on the personal or private work of persons. So thank you very much, Ruben, and I believe I kept my time to 40 minutes. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent, Enrique. Thank you very much for your very stimulating presentation. And now we invite members of the audience to write their questions, to type in their questions in the Q&A through the Q&A function of Zoom and the Q&A box. For Enrique, we have a few minutes. The idea is to finish around 6 p.m. and we have, a few minutes to get some questions. Other folks who are connected to this presentation, please go ahead. If I just taking advantage of the fact that I have the microphone, Enrique, I would ask you, well, here's a question from my colleague Min Zhou, who's the director of the Asia Pacific Center. I will yield to her. She's asking, what impacts does China's foreign direct investment, oops, I think I lost the question here. Oh, she might have asked it. Min, I actually lost your question. somehow.
Could I say it?
Yeah, you can go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
So my question is, Enrique, I really enjoy your talk. It's providing a very good overview about China's investment in Latin America and the importance, as well as the data that is available for scholars who are diving into the area of research. So there has been concern about China's Belt and Road Initiative in some of the developing countries in terms of the impact of the foreign direct investment on local investment. I mean, in local employment of native born workers. So my question is, what impacts does China's FDI on in Latin America on local employment?
Can I respond to the question?
Please go ahead.
So again, the issue of data is fundamental. No, I always say jokingly, if I would have on my right the Mexican ambassador and on my left I would have the Chinese ambassador in Mexico, you hear completely different stories. No, the Chinese ambassador says plus 100 and the Mexican ambassador says minus 50. No, and in between is the fool on the hill, and I say, excuse me, I don't understand your story and your story. They are completely different, and none of them is lying. They are not lying. But the respective statistical, very serious institutions, like the National Bureau of Statistics, I believe it's a serious institution with some problems, like in Mexico, like in the US and whatever, no? When you account for employment, then you are missing a couple of hundreds of millions of workers, etc. But you have to understand the methodologies, no? And surprisingly, few people do that. The impact of the Belt and Road Initiative, very surprisingly, in Latin America regarding overseas foreign direct investment is not very substantial and not very important. We have been engaging with some good friends in Shanghai, in Beijing, and other places, the formal debates regarding when was Latin America formally accepted as being part of the Belt and Road Initiative. No? So very formally, President Xi Jinping in Santiago in January of 2018 told Latin America, welcome to the Belt and Road Initiative. Before that, it was always, well, from Xi'an to Venice and in between Africa, but Latin America was not in this Belt and Road Initiative. And again, China has been investing in Latin America far before 2018, no? And strictly speaking, the institution that is coordinating the Belt and Road Initiative regarding investments and financing is the Asian Investment and Infrastructure Bank. There you have so far until the middle of 2021, one financing project granted by this institution to Ecuador. So again, it would be unjust or unfair to say the Belt and Road Initiative had a huge impact or no impact at all. So far, it has been very minimal and very reduced. And regarding employment, we published in 2018 a book for the ILO, for the International Labor Organization, exactly on this topic. No? 5 countries, more than 10 case studies. No? We are poor. The ILO is also pretty poor, so we didn't have money for doing 100 case studies or even a survey. No? But the topic here was 5 countries and what is the impact of China regarding the quantity and the quality of the generated employment. No? And the results were very astonishing, even for Chinese counterparts. We presented this in Beijing and in other places in China. And Chinese counterparts, as you might know, Professor Mincho, regarding the issue of employment, they're always a little bit skeptical because they know that this is always a topic where most of the counterparts are very critical vis-a-vis China. No? And quantitatively, and we worked again with input-output matrices on trade, FDI, infrastructure, etc. We came up with a quantitative result that Chinese firms until 2018 generated almost 2 million jobs, no? Which was pretty surprising. No? Brazil is the big winner, Mexico is a big loser. No? And so even China Daily and many others were very surprised that China were responsible for 2 million jobs in Latin America. And very surprisingly, in general, let's put it this way, regarding the quality of employment in Latin America, in most of the cases, employment generated is above the regional and national standards, against the myth in which in most of Latin America countries, but also in other parts of the world, there is always the myth that China always tried to downgrade the quality of employment. This was not the case. No? Again, in many cases also because the regional and national standards are very poor. No? But just to give you an idea of what is changing, no? Regarding employment, for example, you have this huge petrochemical, very capital-intensive investments in Brazil, Peru, and other places, no? Very capital intensive. And in the last 2 or 3 years, you have a small investor creating massive employment in Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico, such as Didi, with a very small investment compared to these huge capital investments in the petrochemical sector. Didi, with less than $100 million of investments in 3 countries, generated 160,000 jobs. Again, the discussion is what kind of quality of employment, no? But it shows you this diversification process, and so the story is not only raw materials, oil, gas, food and beverages, etc. No?
Thank you, Enrique. Our colleague, Professor Cindy Fan, who's the Vice Provost for International Studies and Global Engagement at UCLA, asks and writes, "Thanks for a fascinating talk. The notion of a Cold War, in quotes, is so deeply inscribed in the psyche of many when it comes to Russia and China that it's difficult to consider a different framework for understanding international relations in the 2020s. Can you elaborate on the triangulation framework that you seem to be proposing?"
Yes, again, I would invite you to go to my webpage, dusselpeters.com, but also of Cechimex and ALC China, where you will find increasing literature discussions using this concept of new triangular relationships. No, again, probably the older generation, including myself, I don't feel old, but the older generation, I studied in Berlin when it was still West Berlin, no? And so I understand what the Cold War is. But again, millennials, I don't think that our students know what the Cold War is, no? And again, the concept, simply from a historical perspective, begins in the more recent history, highlighting that the 2 biggest economies, you do not have a single hegemon, no? But you have 2 big economies. I always say jokingly, the old guy in town and the new rich guy in town, no? The United States and China, no? Both are important, no? And so these two big economies are having increasingly conflicts, not only trade conflicts, but at all different levels. No, I work very much on this issue up to financial topics and of course regarding technology and many other issues. But that new triangular relationship refers how do third countries behave, interact according to these tensions of these two countries that will continue in the short, medium, and long term. It is not sufficient to have an absolute ideological decision to say, I will marry with China. No, this neither in Latin America, but neither for Vietnam and other countries will be sufficient. So we will need to understand both countries, the United States and China, and take decisions regarding Confucius Institutes, regarding 5G, regarding ports, etc., etc. No? It's an invitation to go beyond this new Cold War discussion. No?
Thank you, Enrique. So I actually now will use my privilege of having the mic here. And you mentioned in your talk, Enrique, that this one of the central points that you make is this idea of, or this trend of diversification of the investments, right? And so it's not in just raw materials, now it's moving to other areas. And also geographically, there's diversification within Latin America and diversification even within China geographically. So that was a big trend of your presentation. In terms of the sectors or the areas of investment in Latin America, and we can speak even more generally, what is the driver? What is behind this diversification? You mentioned quite briefly, I would say, that companies or companies, for lack of a better word, are learning. But I'm thinking about other possible drivers of this diversification, right? What explains it?
Yes, again here, case studies and this discussion regarding the issue of understanding China's OFDI and FDI in general from a macro, meso, micro, and territorial perspective is important because you might end up with different results, even in terms of econometrics, but also in terms of analysis with from a macro perspective versus a micro analysis. No? And I always highlight again, I work at the Graduate School of Economics, and it's not easy to say, you know what, we have to coordinate the results. It's not that the macro analysis is correct or wrong, or the micro is correct or wrong. You have different results and you have to deal with it. No? So diversification, for example, at the country level, I would say you have both drivers, if you want to, Ruben. Chinese firms learning very slowly, no? But learning, doing lots of mistakes. Again, remember, China is doing in 10 or 15 years what the US, Japan, and Germany has been doing for more than 150 years. No? So you have a rapid learning process, but also dramatic mistakes. No? And I could put you to sleep if you want to regarding mistakes. No? But at the country level, you have problems in some countries, no? In Argentina, in Brazil, in Venezuela, no? And learning processes, no? And suddenly this learning process means 10, 15 years ago, auto parts and automobile firms in China thought, you know what, I'm going to invest in Uruguay, no? And we have studied these firms, these Chinese firms. I will invest in Uruguay because from Uruguay, which is part from Mercosur, I will export to Brazil, no? Well, they did the investment, and you know what? Big surprise. Brazil said, my friend, you know what? I don't care about Mercosur. You want to sell in Brazil? You invest in Brazil. And BYD said, but you know what? Here, you can see chapter, I don't know what, of Mercosur. And Brazil said, I don't care. No, so mistakes, learning processes, if you want to. No, this is one story. No, but the other part of the story, again, this monitor of China's OFDI and case studies are very interesting. I work very much on these topics, and I get very passionate on these issues. But as part of this diversification process at the sectorial level, historically, energy, I could have presented lots of more slides. I tried to concentrate this, but historically, energy played a substantial role in terms of raw materials in the first 10 years of the 21st century. And in the last 5 to 10 years, energy is playing a declining role. And transportation is playing an increasing role. And what does transportation mean? Well, increasingly also ports, airports, etc. And in the energy sector, which is not disappearing and still plays an important role, suddenly, very interestingly, you will find huge investments in the renewable sector. No, so you find huge investments in photovoltaic cells. No, but not on my roof, but dozens of square kilometers in Argentina, in Chile, in Mexico, and other places. No, so even the energy sector is suddenly becoming, I don't know if green, but it is changing very substantially from the first decade of the 21st century. No, and this is interesting simply to acknowledge. This is not to say bravo China or boo China, but simply to understand what is going on. No?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Enrique. I want to emphasize how grateful you are for your presentation and how important the work that your center and the network that monitors and analyzes Chinese investments in Latin America and the Caribbean, how important this work is, as you explained to